There's a certain kind of audacity it takes to steal a man's land, not with a deed or a swindle, but with 50,000 gallons of chlorinated water and a mountain of concrete. My name is Mark, and for the last 10 years, my life in this quiet, cookie-cutter suburb was defined by its deliberate lack of drama. I'm a hydrogeologist, which is a fancy way of saying I spend my days analyzing how water moves through rock and soil. It's a quiet, methodical profession for a quiet, methodical man. All I wanted was to come home, tend to my modest garden, and enjoy the peace I'd worked so hard to afford. That peace was shattered the day the backhoes arrived next door. My neighbor, the freshly crowned HOA president, a woman who insisted on being called President Karen, had decided her yard wasn't quite grand enough. For weeks, my life was a symphony of construction noise. I tolerated it, because that's what good neighbors do. But one sun-bleached afternoon, I stood at my kitchen window and realized the pristine, shimmering blue edge of her new resort-style swimming pool was a good 15 feet inside my property line. Not on the line, inside it. The sheer, unmitigated gall of it left me breathless. She had annexed a slice of my backyard to create her personal oasis. Of course, I assumed it was a mistake. A colossal, expensive mistake, but mistake nonetheless. What she didn't know, what no one in this neighborhood knew, was that my quiet profession had armed me with a very particular set of skills. Not skills of confrontation or litigation, but a deep, intricate understanding of water, soil, and the delicate ecological balance of a place. She had brought a battle of water to a water expert, and in her breathtaking arrogance, she had just handed me the weapon I would use to win. Have you ever had someone so brazenly disrespect you that your first reaction is just stunned silence? This was that moment, magnified by concrete and rebar. Little did she know, her beautiful, illegal pool was about to become the site of a very specific, very natural, and very, very smelly act of reclamation. This wasn't just going to be a dispute. It was going to be a lesson in applied science. My first move was to assume this was all a comical, easily rectified error. Armed with a rolled-up copy of my official property survey, certified and stamped by the county, just a year prior when I refinanced my mortgage, I walked over. Karen was lounging on a brand-new chaise, wearing sunglasses the size of dinner plates, and a smug expression that seemed permanently affixed to her face. I politely cleared my throat. "Karen," I began, trying to keep my tone light and neighborly. "We might have a small issue here. It looks like the pool construction went a little off course." I unrolled the survey on her patio table, the crisp paper stark against the faux stone finish. I pointed to the clear, unambiguous iron stake marker at the corner of my property, then to the corresponding line on the map, and then to the 10 feet of her new, gleaming white concrete deck that sat on my side of that line. She didn't even glance at the document. She took a slow sip of her iced tea, lowered her sunglasses to the tip of her nose, and peered at me as if I were a cockroach who had just invited himself to her party. "Oh, that old thing," she said, waving a dismissive hand at the survey. "The board approved the plans based on the developer's original layout. Your survey is probably outdated. Besides, it gives the whole community a more luxurious feel, don't you think?" The board, of course, consisted of her best friend, and a terrified retiree who would agree to anything to avoid a confrontation. She was the judge, jury, and executioner of our neighborhood's covenants, and she had just declared my legal property deed irrelevant. The conversation deteriorated from there. I insisted. She deflected. I mentioned the legalities. She threatened. "You're creating a hostile environment, Mark," she warned, her voice dripping with condescending sweetness. "And the HOA has strict bylaws about homeowner disputes and uncooperative attitudes. I'd hate to have to start fining you." That was it. The threat. The classic power play of the petty tyrant. I was being threatened with fines for defending my own property from her theft. I rolled up my survey, my hands trembling slightly with a rage so pure and cold it felt like ice water in my veins. I had tried reason. I had tried civility. I was met with arrogance and illegal intimidation. As I walked back across my lawn, or what was left of it, I knew the conventional routes were closed. Lawyers would take months, cost a fortune, and she would use HOA funds to fight me. No, this required a different approach. A solution that was elegant, undeniable, and used the very object of her pride as the instrument of her downfall. She wanted that water so badly. She was about to get more of it than she ever bargained for. The next few weeks were a masterclass in psychological warfare, with her as the aggressor. She began hosting loud, obnoxious pool parties that seemed designed to taunt me. Music blared until the legal limit of 10 p.m. Laughter and splashing echoed through my walls. Inflatable flamingos and stray beach balls regularly found their way into my azaleas. It was a constant, deliberate reminder of her victory. She was rubbing my face in the land she had stolen. But with every booming bass note, every shriek of forced fun, my frustration didn't curdle into despair. It crystallized into focus. I retreated to my home office, not to draft angry emails, but to do what I do best: research. I wasn't just looking for legal loopholes anymore. I was conducting a full-scale environmental impact assessment on a target of one. My desk became a collage of data. I pulled up geological survey maps of our specific subdivision. Just as I suspected, the developer had built on a foundation rich in sedimentary clay. It was great for supporting foundations, but absolutely terrible for water drainage. A hydrogeologist's nightmare, but a strategist's dream. Then, I cross-referenced this with municipal codes. I spent hours reading through the county's health and sanitation ordinances, a document so mind-numbingly dull, it was the perfect hiding place for a weapon. And then I found it. The aha moment. Tucked away in Section 4, Subsection B, Article 11, was a clause titled Public Nuisance Abatement of Artificial Water Features. It stated in dry, bureaucratic language that any man-made body of water over 100 gallons found to be a breeding ground for culicity, the common mosquito, was a public health hazard. The owner would be subject to significant daily fines and a mandatory, immediate order to abate the nuisance, which meant draining and filling the source. This wasn't an HOA bylaw she could rewrite. This was county law backed by public health and safety. The final piece of the puzzle fell into place. I didn't need to destroy her pool. I didn't need to damage her property. I just had to let nature, with a little encouragement, do what it does best. I had to make her gleaming, sterile, chlorinated status symbol into a thriving, self-sustaining ecosystem. I had to turn Karen's illegal pool into a primordial swamp. The plan that formed in my mind was not one of brute force, but of surgical precision. It was a beautiful, multi-stage operation that would use ecological principles as its primary weapon. This wasn't going to be a childish prank of tossing mud over the fence. This was going to be a scientific masterpiece of accelerated eutrophication. My goal was simple: to create the perfect environment for an algal bloom and, subsequently, a mosquito population explosion, all while maintaining plausible deniability. I broke it down into 2 phases. Phase 1, preparation of the medium. Her pool was a chemically hostile environment, filled with chlorine and other sanitizers designed to kill exactly the kind of life I wanted to encourage. The first step was to neutralize her defenses. This was surprisingly easy. A large, slow-dosing introduction of sodium thiosulfate, a common dechlorinating agent used in aquariums, would do the trick. It was colorless, odorless, and would silently eat away at the chlorine over a few days. Simultaneously, I would cripple her filtration system. Her pool pump and skimmers were on the side of her house, closest to my yard. Under the cover of darkness, it would be simple to strategically deposit fine-grained sediment, leaves, and other organic debris near the skimmer intakes, causing a gradual reduction in flow and eventual clogging. She would assume it was a mechanical failure, a common occurrence with new pool systems. With the sanitizer gone and the filter failing, the pool would become a stagnant but still clear, blank canvas. Phase 2, the inoculation. This was the masterstroke. A stagnant pool will eventually turn green on its own, but I didn't have time for eventually. I needed to supercharge the process. I would brew a potent cocktail in my garage. The recipe was simple: a base of water mixed with a high-nitrogen, high-phosphate fertilizer. Essentially, Miracle Grow for algae. To this, I would add a starter culture. A few scoops of nutrient-rich sludge and water from a nearby pond would introduce a diverse population of dormant algae spores, bacteria, and microscopic organisms. But the real piece de resistance was the introduction of Lemna minor, better known as duckweed. It's a tiny, free-floating aquatic plant that can double its mass in 24 hours under the right conditions. A handful would become a thick, green mat covering the entire surface in a week, blocking sunlight and starving any competing organisms. It would also create the perfect, shaded, still water environment for mosquito larvae to thrive. I was not destroying her property. I was merely cultivating it. I was a gardener, and her pool was my new, very expensive flower bed. While I was in my garage playing mad scientist, Karen's arrogance reached a new crescendo. Completely oblivious to the ecological time bomb I was preparing, she doubled down on her reign as the queen of our cul-de-sac. Her confidence was a fortress, impenetrable and absolute. She had stolen my land, faced no consequences, and was now reveling in her victory. The pool parties became more frequent, the music louder, the laughter more grating. She was a Roman emperor in a sun visor, and her illegally constructed pool was her coliseum. One afternoon, I found an official-looking envelope stuck to my front door. It was from the HOA. My hands were steady as I opened it. Inside was a formal violation notice, complete with a grainy, zoomed-in photograph of the grass along our shared, and now disputed, property line. The notice, signed with a flourish by President Karen, cited a violation of Bylaw 74, failure to maintain lawn aesthetics. She was fining me $100 for the slightly too long grass on the very strip of land her pool deck now occupied. The audacity was so profound, so utterly shameless, it was almost sublime. It was the final confirmation I needed. Any lingering shred of doubt, any whisper of a thought that I might be going too far, vanished in a puff of righteous indignation. This wasn't about a property line anymore. It was about dismantling the power structure of a petty tyrant who believed the rules were only for other people. That evening, I finalized my preparations. I wore gloves and a hoodie, feeling like a character in a spy movie, as I mixed my ecological cocktails. I procured several large bags of high-quality compost and fine clay soil, which will provide a slow-release source of nutrients at the bottom of the pool. I found a local pond teeming with life and carefully collected several 5-gallon buckets of its murky, green water, ensuring it was full of the microscopic life I needed. The final ingredient was the duckweed, sourced from an online aquarium supply store, delivered discreetly in a small, unassuming package. My garage looked less like a suburban workshop and more like a bioterrorist lab, but my conscience was clear. She had drawn first blood with fines and theft. I was simply responding with biology. Her overconfidence was her greatest vulnerability, and I was about to exploit it in the most natural way imaginable. The execution began on a moonless Tuesday night. The air was still and heavy, carrying the faint scent of chlorine from Karen's aquatic throne room, a scent I was about to permanently erase. Dressed in dark clothing, I moved with the silent purpose of a commando on a mission. The first step was neutralizing her chemical defenses. I had mixed the sodium thiosulfate with water in a garden sprayer. It allowed me to stand discreetly on my own property and cast a fine, silent mist over the entire surface of the pool. It was invisible, it was quiet, and it was the chemical equivalent of disabling a security system. For the next 2 nights, I repeated this process, ensuring the chlorine levels would drop to virtually zero. My next target was the filtration system. This required a bit more finesse. Her pool equipment was shielded by a low fence, but the intake skimmers were at the water's edge. Using a long-handled rake from my side of the non-existent property line, I carefully pushed clumps of leaves, grass clippings, and fine organic debris towards the skimmer openings. It wasn't vandalism. It was merely landscaping. From any casual observer, it would look like the wind had simply been unkind. Within a day, the gentle hum of her pool pump developed a strained, gurgling sound. The flow of water from the return jets slowed to a pathetic trickle. I had effectively given her expensive, state-of-the-art system a terminal case of emphysema. With the pool's lungs and immune system disabled, it was time for Phase 1 to conclude. The water began to change. It lost its brilliant, artificial blue and took on a slightly dull, cloudy appearance. Karen, I noticed, was on the phone with her pool service company, gesticulating wildly towards the water. The pool guy came out, scratched his head, added a shock treatment of chlorine, and left. He didn't know he was pouring medicine into a dead patient. My nightly mistings of neutralizer rendered his efforts completely moot. The stage was now perfectly set. The water was a stagnant, nutrient-primed incubator, waiting for life. She was frustrated, but not yet alarmed. She saw a mechanical problem, a chemical imbalance. She couldn't see the truth, that her pristine monument to ego was on the verge of a spectacular biological collapse. With the pool chemically pacified and its circulation crippled, it was time to unleash the full force of nature. This was Phase 2, the point of no return. My garage had become a veritable witch's kitchen of ecological weaponry. The buckets of murky pond water were bubbling with life, a foul-smelling but potent primordial soup. One night, after her lights had been off for hours, I began the inoculation. I couldn't just dump the buckets in. That would be too obvious. Instead, I used a small, battery-powered pump and a long, dark hose, siphoning the content from the buckets in my yard and releasing the life-giving sludge deep beneath the surface on her side. It was a silent, microbial invasion. Next came the fertilizer. I dissolved the high nitrogen granules in water to create a concentrated liquid nutrient bomb, which I distributed using the same hose and pump method. I was feeding the unseen. I was pouring fuel on a fire that hadn't yet ignited. The final touch, my masterstroke, was the duckweed. I started with just a handful, a tiny green cluster that I gently floated into a quiet corner of the pool. It looked like nothing, just a few stray leaves. But I knew what it was, the vanguard of a green invasion. The transformation was faster than even I had predicted. Within 3 days, the cloudiness in the water took on a distinct greenish tinge. By the end of the first week, the pool was a uniform, opaque pea soup. The algal bloom was in full swing. Karen was in a state of escalating panic. The pool guy came and went, looking increasingly defeated. He drained half the water, refilled it, and shocked it with more and more chemicals, but it was like trying to sterilize the ocean. My nightly nutrient boosts and the established microbial colony were too powerful. Then, the duckweed took hold. With no chlorine to inhibit it and a feast of nitrates to fuel it, the tiny plants began to multiply at an exponential rate. A small patch became a floating island, which then became a sprawling, verdant carpet. By the end of the second week, you couldn't see the water at all. Her 50,000-gallon pool was now covered in a thick, green mat. The smell started then, too. A rich, earthy, swamp-like odor began to emanate from the water, a perfume of decay and rampant life. And with the smell came the sound, a low, persistent, inescapable buzzing. The mosquitoes had arrived. The climax of my plan wasn't going to be a shouting match over a fence. It was going to be a quiet phone call and the inexorable turning of bureaucratic gears. The buzzing around Karen's house had become a neighborhood-wide issue. Barbecues were cut short. Evening walks became a gauntlet of slapping and itching. Murmurs started in the community Facebook group, with people complaining about a sudden plague of mosquitoes. No one knew the source, but I did. I had created a 5-star, all-inclusive resort for every mosquito in a 5-mile radius, and it was time for the grand opening to be officially recognized. On a Monday morning, I made an anonymous call to the county's public health department. I kept my voice calm and neutral, a concerned citizen reporting a possible health code violation. "Hello," I said. "I'd like to report a serious issue in the Oakwood Creek subdivision. There's a home with a large, completely stagnant swimming pool. It's turned into a swamp, frankly. The smell is overwhelming, and the mosquitoes are unbearable. I'm genuinely concerned about West Nile virus." I provided Karen's address, and for good measure, I cited the specific ordinance I'd found. Section 4, subsection B, Giving the inspector the exact code to reference was like giving a hunter a map directly to his prey. They took the report very seriously. But I wasn't done. My second call was to the tip line of a local news station known for its Consumer Watch segments that specialized in publicizing local disputes and bureaucratic failures. I spun a similar, anonymous tale. You won't believe this. The president of our HOA, who finds people for the color of their mailboxes, has a literal cesspool in her backyard. It's a health hazard, and we think she built it illegally on her neighbor's land. You should see it. I knew the combination of public health scares and accusations of hypocrisy against a person in a position of petty power was an irresistible story. I had lit the fuse. All I had to do now was sit back and watch the show. Justice, I've found, is sometimes best served not hot or cold, but at room temperature, delivered by a clipboard-wielding county employee and a cameraman looking for a compelling B-roll. The convergence was more beautiful than I could have ever orchestrated. On Wednesday afternoon, right as Karen was setting up for what looked like a desperate attempt at a poolside bridge game, two vehicles pulled up to her house. The first was a white county-owned sedan with the official seal of the Public Health Department on the door. The second was a news van with a large, garish TV station logo plastered on the side. A reporter and a cameraman hopped out, their expressions hungry. I watched from my kitchen window, sipping a cup of coffee, the feeling of vindication so pure and sweet it was almost dizzying. The health inspector, a grim-faced man with a clipboard, met Karen at her front door. The news crew hung back, filming from the sidewalk. I could see Karen's transformation from smug hostess to cornered animal. Her initial smile was wide and fake, but it faltered as the inspector explained why he was there. She tried to block him, but he calmly stated his legal authority to inspect a potential public health nuisance. Reluctantly, she led him to the backyard. The reporter and cameraman followed, capturing every moment. The scene in her backyard was a masterpiece of ecological horror. The once glittering pool was now a festering bog. The green carpet of duckweed was so thick it looked solid, and a miasmic vapor rose from its surface. The air hummed with a veritable cloud of mosquitoes. The inspector didn't need to do much investigating. He took one look, dipped a collection jar into the murky depths, and held it up. It was teeming with wriggling larvae. "Ma'am," he announced, his voice loud enough for the camera's microphone to pick up, "this is one of the worst violations I've seen in years. This is a grade A public health hazard," he began writing on his clipboard. "You'll be receiving a fine of $500 for every day this is not abetted. And you have 48 hours to present a contract with a licensed professional to have this entire feature drained, sanitized, and filled." "No exceptions," Karen sputtered, her face a mask of rage and humiliation. She tried to argue, to blame the pool company, to blame the chemicals, to blame anything but herself. But then the reporter stepped forward. "Ma'am, is it also true," he asked, his tone dripping with journalistic sincerity, "that this pool was constructed illegally and extends onto your neighbor's property?" He gestured vaguely in my direction. That was the kill shot. Karen's face went from red to ashen gray. She was trapped, exposed, and utterly humiliated on camera. Her empire of arrogance, built on a foundation of stolen land and concrete, had just crumbled into a stinking, mosquito-infested swamp. The aftermath was swift and brutal. The news segment aired that night, a glorious 6-minute piece of public shaming. It showed everything: the festering green water, the swarms of mosquitoes, the furious inspector, and Karen's sputtering, incoherent defense. The reporter had even managed to get a copy of my property survey from the county records office, which they displayed on screen next to an aerial shot showing the pool's clear encroachment onto my land. The story was a local sensation. Karen became an overnight pariah. The HOA board, facing a tidal wave of angry, mosquito-bitten homeowners, called an emergency meeting. In a unanimous vote, with Karen abstaining in shame, she was stripped of her title as president. Her reign was over. The financial consequences were just as severe. She had to pay thousands in county fines. The cost to drain the biological catastrophe in her backyard, excavate the toxic sludge, jackhammer out the 15 feet of concrete and rebar that sat on my property, and then fill the gaping hole with dirt was astronomical. It was a complete and total financial and social ruin, all stemming from her initial act of theft. For my part, I simply had a fence company come out and install a beautiful, sturdy, 6-foot privacy fence directly on the now undisputed property line. The sound of their post-hole digger was the sweetest music I had ever heard. Looking back, the lesson is clear. You should always try the path of reason and decency first. But when you're dealing with an arrogant bully who believes they are above the rules, playing their game is a losing proposition. The only way to win is to change the game entirely. You have to find a lever they can't control, a force they can't intimidate. For Karen, that force was a combination of county health codes and basic biology. She thought she was fighting a quiet homeowner. She didn't realize she was in a war with an entire ecosystem that I had expertly weaponized. Justice was restored, my peace was reclaimed, and our neighborhood was finally free of its petty tyrant. It proves that sometimes the most powerful tool you have is the specialized knowledge you've quietly cultivated your whole life. So let me ask you, what's your hidden superpower? What unique skill do you possess that, if needed, could restore a little bit of balance to the world?